Let's start season 4, this little bonus episode for Halloween. We got another serial killer for you. Last year we had Jack the Ripper, and this year we have a remarkably similar story, if you think about it, with the Zodiac killer, who was causing havoc in Northern California in basically, the late 60s, and the story kind of goes into the early 70s with the investigation.
Right.
But similar in that they're both unsolved, that we still don't officially know Jack the Ripper, and we don't officially know who the Zodiac killer is.
Right. And also similar in that there are whole kind of societies of people who dedicate their lives to try and solving it. I mean, you see that with Jack the Ripper and with Zodiac.
Yes, and I actually didn't realize this until this morning doing a little research, so Jake Gyllenhaal's character in the film is the person who wrote the books that the film is based off of. And I guess I did that. It was, right. So I think the movie handled that in a good way, that yes, he was a major character, but it wasn't like totally from his point of view. And yes, he was definitely one of him and kind of what Robert Downey Jr. and then Mark Ruffalo are kind of the three people they focus on going through this investigation. But yes, it was Jake Gyllenhaal's character who did write the books that inspired the film. So this is an interesting one because I had never heard of this cold case. Everyone kind of hears of Jack the Ripper growing up. I had never heard of the Zodiac killings until the movie came out. Were you kind of in a similar boat with that? Of course, probably too, because you were probably in middle school when the movie came out, I guess.
Yeah, the movie came out in 2007.
Right.
So yeah, I don't think I probably had heard anything about the Zodiac killer before the movie came out.
Though it would have been weirder if you were 14 and had.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah, I know all about him. I think I saw his cryptography stuff. Yeah, so just the whole idea, you see, it's always become a trope in movies, I think, in the last decade, of the serial killer that's taunting the investigators, which, again, Jack the Ripper did, and you see in fiction all the time now, but the Zodiac killer did it too, and was writing letters to the press and the investigators, basically daring them to catch him, and ultimately, they never do, and that's freaking scary.
Yeah. I mean, people probably don't have to worry now. Like, whoever it was is likely dead or at the very least inactive.
Right. I mean, right. Yeah, just let's do some math here. Even if they were only 20 when they did the killings, they'd be 70 now. And yeah, odds are they were 30 or 40 or even older. And so it's interesting, too, the movie, and again, this is kind of inevitable, the movie kind of does point the finger at one specific suspect.
Yeah.
Even though they do talk about how some of the evidence against him is soft, the movie still kind of makes the point of saying, yeah, this was the guy.
Yeah.
But doing the research, that's kind of just conjecture. I mean, yes, he's one of the suspects, but I don't think there's enough evidence to say that, yes, it was even probably him. It was maybe him.
I personally, I think that it was probably Arthur Lee Allen.
Okay.
There is actually a pretty substantial amount of actual physical evidence that points away from him.
Right.
But I think there's just too many coincidences. And I mean,
true. The circumstantial stuff is out the wazoo, but
yes, a lot of it is circumstantial, but yeah, I mean, we can get into that later, but yeah, it's funny if you go on the Wikipedia page under suspects, it's Arthur Lee Allen and then everybody else.
Correct. And he is the primary. But again, because of the lack of physical, and honestly, even using modern technology, there's still no DNA evidence that's been able to link him to it either. So that's, I guess, what gave me a little pause.
Right. But the circumstantial evidence, I think, is convincing enough to me to where I'm probably at least 80% sure that it was him.
And that's
fair. Then also the fact that throughout the whole investigation, he was the only person who ever had a search warrant executed on his home. And he was actually he was about to be charged when he died.
Oh, was he? Okay.
Yeah.
And that's just interesting, though, from a legal standpoint, though, you do get into that dangerous territory. We talk about, yes, we have this circumstantial evidence that's really, really strong, but if you're looking at convicting someone, you have to have overwhelming evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. And just as someone, again, I'll agree with you, it probably was him. But at the same time, from a legal standpoint, I don't know if they have the case. It's honestly, it's similar. Did you ever listen to Serial with the whole Anad Syed thing, whatever, where
Yes.
it still kind of gives that point of view? Again, now, I do think it's kind of, not necessarily biased, but it seems to have, agenda is a strong word too. But there was a documentary that kind of, on HBO, that was kind of the case against him. But within just listening to Serial itself, I would say my assessment is it could have been him, but regardless, they didn't have the evidence required to convict based on what's in the podcast.
Right. Yeah. So let me add a caveat to me saying that I am pretty sure it was Arthur Lee Allen that did it. If I was a juror in a trial and that's the evidence that, that I was able to research, if that's what was presented in the trial, I don't think that I would vote to convict him.
Right.
If that makes sense.
And that's tough when you think it's somebody.
Actually with the Adnan Syed case. That one, I think I don't know how he ever got convicted, but that is
right.
Literally an entire podcast.
Even if he did it, I don't see how they got the evidence to convict him. But I have not seen a documentary that might kind of expose a little other light. Okay, back to Zodiac. But no, I think they handled it really well. And this is a movie I remember just thinking it was okay the first time, and I'd say I liked it a lot more the second time. I just appreciated the filmmaking. The actors are great, and this is kind of fairly early on. The biggest thing that surprised me is this movie had 0 Oscar nominations. Now, it was in the world of only 5 Best Picture nominees, but it had no other nominations anyway. So I was looking, though, you look at where this falls within David Fincher's career, he definitely has some hits before this, but from an awards standpoint, he was not respected at this point. So prior to Zodiac, he does have Fight Club and Seven are big movies, and even something like The Game and Panic Room. There's mainstream stuff, but awards-wise, you basically had Fight Club was nominated for a Sound Effects Award. There's just not a lot of nominations around David Fincher movies, and that continues through Zodiac, but then it changes quickly when they expand the field to more than 5 Best Picture nominees, and Benjamin Button gets in, and then Social Network almost wins, and then all of a sudden, you have a quick change where now David Fincher is considered a list director.
He's auteur status.
Yes, exactly. And that anything he has coming out is going to be seen in a whole different way. And I don't know if that's just kind of the industry catching up with what he's doing, or if, look at the voting body of the awards steers younger and becomes more of his fans that are now voting for stuff. And that just kind of is always going to be a shift that's slow to come around. So anyway, it just surprised me that Zodiac had 0 Oscar nominations it's just a quality production, even if it's not your favorite movie. And the acting is really strong and everything.
Yeah, the acting is really good. Jake Gyllenhaal is a really, really good performance. I really like Mark Ruffalo as the detective.
Which, that blew me away that that character, because it doesn't fit at all with the way Mark Ruffalo portrays him, but the real life guy he's playing is the inspiration for Dirty Harry.
Yeah.
And Steve McQueen's character in Bullet, which you see those guys is a little more obviously badass.
And they actually there's a quick mention in the movie, one of the other cops calls Dave Toschi, he calls him Bullet in the movie. Or refers to him as Bullet or calls him Bullet. But it's like a quick thing that watching it this is probably the 4th or 5th time that I've seen this movie, and I had never caught that before. But this time I did.
So is it, I could kind of vaguely remember, so is that more of a meta reference for the audience, or would the character at the time be aware that Steve McQueen's character in Bullet was based on him?
He would have, because the movie came out, Bullet came out in 1968.
Okay.
So and then at that point in the movie, it was the mid 70s. So
the character would have been aware. Yeah. That's interesting.
He definitely would have known. Yeah.
Of course, then I thought the even better reference, because again, this whole Northern California world is also where George Lucas was growing up. Did you see this one?
I think so.
So the cop we're talking about, who Mark Ruffalo plays, is Dave Toschi, and George Lucas didn't necessarily appreciate the way he was kind of maligned in the media, and he gets ultimately falsely accused because he was exonerated for falsifying or forging a letter from the Zodiac killer that ended up causing him a lot of career trouble, but he was ultimately exonerated anyway. So as a nod to Dave Toschi, George Lucas talks about Toschi Station on Tatooine that Luke wants to go visit his friends at. So
yeah,
I love when you get little references like that from the real world into art, and you would never catch it if you aren't super familiar with all this.
Yeah, absolutely. So this something that I was thinking about when I was watching this. I almost wish that, because I was 14 when this movie came out. I don't think I saw it until at least a couple of years later.
Right.
But I kind of wish that I would have been able to appreciate when the movie was coming out, in the lead up to it, like David Fincher is going to direct this movie about the Zodiac case, a serial killer case that's never been solved. And
Right.
it's got Mark Ruffalo and Jake Gyllenhaal. Like, I just think that I would have been on the hype train for this movie.
True.
If I would have been old enough to appreciate it.
And I should have been, and I don't think I saw it right away. Of course, I'm kind of squeamish and stuff when it comes to these serial killer movies. They're just not my cup of tea generally. This one's not gory or anything though. It is more on the investigative side. It still freaks me out a little bit though. So
it's not necessarily gory, but
well, that's true. You see a couple of the killings, and it's tense. It's tense for sure.
A couple of them are kind of more stylized, but there's the killing where the couple gets murdered by the lake
in broad daylight.
And it is broad daylight. It's one shot. There's no cuts. It's not like a cool like stylized action scene. It is just a kind of almost not a wide shot, but all three of them are in the shot and both of them just getting stabbed to death for 45 seconds. The camera doesn't move or cut or pan or anything, and there's no music. It's like, this is basically exactly what happened.
And that's where the brilliance of David Fincher as a director kind of comes in. It's easy for that to get, you can almost make that not gimmicky, but just frenetic. You could add a freneticness to the filmmaking that would, maybe, I don't know, it would have a visceral effect on the audience, but I think it's more impactful if the camera's almost just silently watching and not judging. And it's like, why is it not judging this murderer? Like, it's just watching.
Yep. And it's like, it emphasizes to the viewer, like, you are going to sit there and you're going to watch this, and the camera's not going to flinch or move or look away. And there's nothing you can do to stop it, and you can't help them. And it's, oh man.
Yes, helplessness. Yes, it adds to the feeling of helplessness.
Yes. And that is, I think, that scene is definitely disturbing.
Yes.
So, I can understand if people don't enjoy watching the movie because of that, but
yeah, my mom could never watch this movie.
Yeah.
And it also, I think too, that same shot makes you think they're gonna get away. I don't know why I think that. You kind of know this is a movie about the serial killer, but you still almost think that these are going to be people who survive and get to tell the tale because it's broad daylight.
The guy did.
Well,
survive.
That's true, but it wasn't. He was the guy, right? Yeah, it's right. Yeah. They kind of do talk about too that the Zodiac killer seems so obsessed with making sure the women died that he kind of neglected the men, and so you look at the victims. So it is interesting. This Zodiac killer claimed to kill a lot of people, a couple dozen, I think. I forget the number, but they only officially know of 5, and then that's 2 more that were attacked and survived are these 2 men. The one at the lake here, and then the one of his first victims in the car. The kids, the teenagers, basically, at like kind of the necking point, are shot in the car. But it's very similar to Jack the Ripper. There's kind of the ones they know for sure. There's the probablys, and then there's the maybes. Same kind of thing here with Zodiac. And he was taking credit for stuff that the authorities have not been able to prove, because he's calling in and saying he did it. Right. Well, he's also playing games with them, so you don't just take his word for it.
Right, and a lot of the murders that he took credit for that are not officially attributed to him were murders that were reported in the press that he then writes into the newspaper and takes credit for. But most of those murders, he doesn't offer any details other than what was public knowledge anyway. The ones that were for sure him were the ones where he either sent in physical evidence, like the pieces of the taxi driver's shirt, or ones where he offered details that were not released to the public, so they knew it was him, basically.
Was the shirt thing, was that real, or was that just in the movie? I didn't see that specifically.
Yes, that was real.
Okay. It's just a detail that I missed there. So we've kind of been dancing around it. The movie focuses on kind of the 3 guys we've mentioned, played by Mark Ruffalo, Robert Downey Jr., and Jake Gyllenhaal. Mark Ruffalo, and actually no worse than his partner is Anthony Edwards.
Goose.
Yeah, and so they're the cops that are actually on the case, the detectives. Meanwhile, the other 2 guys are working at a newspaper. I was going to say reporters, but Jake Gyllenhaal's character isn't actually a reporter. He's the cartoonist who just becomes obsessed with the Zodiac killer and the whole puzzle aspect to it, and kind of then does well enough in his own independent research that he kind of befriends is a strong word, but he kind of makes a connection with Mark Ruffalo's character, who gives him what information he can, kind of under the table. And then, of course, in the movie and in real life, this Robert Grayson, Jake Gyllenhaal's character, who wrote the books the movie is based on, got so obsessed that, it cost him his marriage, it cost him his job, and yes, he did, publish some books on it, but basically just became, monomaniacal, good word, about this case and just obsessed with it. And like I said, they definitely show that in the movie in a way that doesn't make him seem crazy. I think they do a good job. Movies definitely can take this stuff too far. So that's, again, where I think Fincher and the whole filmmaking and Jake himself do a good job of showing someone who is obsessed, yes, probably past the point where it's healthy, but not past the point where it seems like, oh man, this could be me. Like, it's just like someone who's just really obsessed with this thing and just always into it. But he doesn't seem like a crazy person. He doesn't seem totally unhealthy. He doesn't. Right. He just is just really, really obsessed with this and won't let it go. But it's never been solved. It's hard not to let it, or it's hard to let it go when this serial killer is still at large, and you kind of feel for him from that regard. And it's a scary movie. It really is, even though it's kind of a procedural almost. Yeah,
I didn't. Obviously, in the movie, they point to the guy who in the movie, as far as suspects, they do mention a couple of other people that they think might have been viable suspects, but it kind of focuses on Arthur Lee Allen. Was that the same viewpoint that Robert Graysmith had in real life in his books? Or is that was that more of a David Fincher thing?
See, the information on, well, at least on Grayson's Wikipedia page, or Graysmith, that information is just non-existent. We'd probably have to read the books, I guess, to get the exact opinions as far as that goes. So you're right. I don't know to what extent it was Graysmith or Fincher who kind of chose to take it in the direction they did as far as really pointing the finger at the one guy. And then, like I said, mentioning some of those others. The movie theater employee that kind of freaks Gyllenhaal out at the end, is he even listed on the Wikipedia page as other possible suspects, or is that something they just kind of used for the movie? Because I forget that character's name.
Yeah, I don't remember that. So he was going to, Jake Gyllenhaal's character in the movie is going to that guy who has all the movie posters to talk about somebody else, which I forget the guy's name. Rick Marshall. So Rick Marshall was he was a guy who was a projectionist at that movie theater who also lived in the area. He owned the same model of typewriter that one of the typewritten letters was made on.
Right.
There was a few other things, but
he's not listed on the Wikipedia page as a suspect.
No, he's not.
Yeah,
no,
okay.
He's not.
So that's either an invention of, well, you wouldn't think the books are nonfiction, so that's probably just a red herring for the film, I would imagine.
Rick Marshall?
Yeah.
No, he was seriously considered in real life, and there's some people who think that he did it.
Well, he's not listed on the Wikipedia page for potential suspect.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why. But,
oh, gotcha. But you're saying he should be. Okay, yeah. I gotcha. And yeah, so most movies like this, you would feel like you come to some kind of conclusion where there's a confrontation, and it's not many movies that just kind of end with, spoiler alert if you haven't seen Zodiac, although it's based on a true story and we already told you it's an unsolved case. But Jake does track him down. Is it Jake or Robert Downey Jr. that tracks him down at the hardware store at the end?
It's Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah, okay. Tracks him down at the end and basically just makes eye contact with him in a hardware store long enough that they have this kind of moment where I know, you know, and you know I know, and I'm walking away, but I found you. It's you. I know it's you. And definitely kind of hangs the lantern on that. And that's basically, I don't know if you call it the climax, it kind of happens in the denouement, but that's kind of the close. That's all the closure you get, is that, but it's the way for Jake's character, who's been obsessed with this, to find some kind of closure. And it's like, I had to know. I spent the last 10, 20 years obsessed with knowing who this guy was. And I'm confident that I know. He's not going to be arrested, but I know. And that's kind of the emotional catharsis, I guess, you get to feel somewhat satisfied with the end of the movie.
Yeah. Neither one of them says anything, but the look on his face is like,
yes,
it totally changes. Yep.
And again, great filmmaking. I just kind of all around.
Yep.
And
yeah,
very impressed. And again, I was just kind of shocked that this had nothing. I mean, you would think the score, right? Same thing like, Fight Club, get a sound effects or sound editing nomination, but And yeah, I was also surprised too that Fincher's only done 4 movies since this, which just kind of blows me away even saying it. It's after Zodiac, he did Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Social Network,
Mhm.
Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and Gone Girl. And now he does have another one that's post production right now. But of course, we'll see what happens with. We are filming this still in the midst of kind of the lockdown with the coronavirus in the spring still. So we don't know to what extent Hollywood productions are going to be put on hold going forward here and what Fincher's up to. But hopefully we get back to seeing more of his films. Because I enjoy them overall. I'm probably not some people are kind of huge Fincher fanboys. A lot of the critic podcasts I listen to, they are obsessed with him and think he can do no wrong. And I'm like, yeah, his movies are good. Fight Club is still my favorite of all his. And The Game is one I have not seen that's really highly rated, and I don't know how I missed it.
Yeah. So before we close it out, I feel like we have talked a lot about Arthur Lee Allen, and we've talked about the evidence against him. So I feel like we should go through and talk about at least how much evidence there is, and then and how much is actually evidence that points to him specifically versus circumstantial evidence. So I guess we'll start with direct evidence. So Mike Migeot, he was the kid who in the movie is the
first victim?
Right. So, well, he's the first person. Him and the girl are the couple that are out on like the Lover's Lane area.
Yes.
At Lake Herman. Or sorry, not Lake Herman, Blue Rock Springs. So he survived. And then in 1992, so, this is several years later, but he picked Arthur Lee Allen out of a photo lineup.
Right.
And said, that's the guy who shot me.
20-some years earlier. Yeah.
Right. But it's still evidence.
Yes.
And then the other victim that survived, Brian Hartnell, he picked out his voice and said that his appearance was similar to the guy who attacked him and tried to kill him. But I mean, once we get into like the circumstantial evidence is where, I mean, it's so much.
It's uncanny. You're right. It's uncanny.
That it's crazy. It's so much that it's crazy. So in the movie, and I think in real life too, Arthur Lee Allen was brought to the attention of the cops by this guy that he worked with, Don Cheney. Don Cheney told the cops that he and Allen had talked about, or I guess Allen had told him that he would like to kill couples, that he would write letters if he was a serial killer, that, he would taunt the police and write letters to them, that he would call himself Zodiac, that he would use the Zodiac symbol from his Zodiac watch, which he actually owned. Right. That's not just made up in the movie. That's right. In real life.
It almost seems like that's ridiculous. That's too much in the movie. It's like, no, that's true.
Yep, that's real. That he talked about how he could attach a flashlight, tape a pen light to the end of his gun to make it easier to shoot at night at close distance, which is something that Zodiac talked about. In one of his letters, he talked about how he had a gun or a light taped to the end of his gun, and it made it easier to shoot people at night. His birthday is December 18th, which is, in the movie, they talk about the lady at Melvin Belli's house, the housekeeper, who answers a phone from someone who talks about, I need to kill someone. It's my birthday. I need to kill. And that was on December 18th.
Right.
And that's Arthur Lee Allen's birthday. He lived in Vallejo during the Blue Rock Springs murders and the Lake Herman murders, and he was a possible known associate or friend of Darlene Ferrin, who was murdered in the Blue Rock Springs murder, which is the Lover's Lane, car shooting murder at the very beginning of the movie.
Which, yeah, and kind of to your point, there's definitely enough circumstantial evidence, it seems, to make an arrest, even if there's not to convict, right? And I guess, is that your point, that they were ultimately going to make an arrest, but then he died? But that was like decades after the fact, right?
Yeah, it was decades later. They were still working the case, and they were actually pretty close to charging him, but then he ended up dying, I think, of a heart attack or something. But yeah, I mean, there's a ton. I mean, literally pages of circumstantial evidence. Even stuff like the only sick day that he took in 1966 was November 1st, and Sherry Jo Bates was murdered on October 30th, 1966. Is that a coincidence? Maybe, but it's like...
Right, but then again, when the police search his place, they don't find anything, and the handwriting samples don't match. And,
right,
yeah,
there's no blood, handwriting doesn't match. That The DNA from this, they tested DNA from one of the stamps. It was a lick stamp.
Yeah.
It didn't match him.
Right.
Yeah, they said that the handwriting didn't match. The gun that they recovered from his trailer that they searched didn't match any of the bullets that were recovered. So,
but again, he might have been that methodical, I guess, is that he covered his tracks that well, and so yes, the circumstantial evidence was there. But then again, it seems like if you're going to be so careful about covering up the actual evidence, he seems pretty careless when it comes to the circumstantial stuff. Like, why are you talking about admitting to your birthday or talking about your plans and then doing them that way? I agree with you. It was most likely him, but it just seems weird that he's super careful over here and super careless over here if it is him.
And I also think so. Like, there was also stuff like back then, not every jurisdiction recorded 911 calls. So he called in multiple times after murders, to report the crimes and, basically say, oh, there's a double murder here. But technology at that time was not such that they recorded, because where are you going to, honestly, it was a storage thing back then. So that evidence is gone. I think if these murders are committed, not just now, 50 years later, but even if he commits these murders 20 or 30 years later.
Right. If this is 1990, he gets busted. You're right. Yeah.
Yep. It's caught for sure, I think.
Yeah, it's crazy. So yes, a very scary, true story that we thought it was appropriate to kick off season 4 here for Halloween for you. Anything else before we go?
Nope. Watch the movie though.
Yeah, it is a good movie. Check it out. Even if you're a little skittish, just do what I did. Just, watch it at 11 a.m. with all the lights on. And yeah, so we will get started on Election Day next Tuesday. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you then.